Getting talked over at work creates a dilemma. On the one hand, if you let the person talk over you, you miss the opportunity to speak. On the other hand, if you try to talk back over them, you risk looking like the bad guy. Today, I'm going to teach you the solution to this problem. It's something that I call the BPI framework. And this is a framework that's going to help you take back the floor in a way that is authoritative, but also collaborative. The BPI in the BPI framework stands for Build, Pivot, Inspire. And I'm going to teach you each part step by step. To do that, we're going to use a fictional work scenario. So imagine this. You're sitting in a cross-functional meeting. The subject of the meeting is that you and your colleagues are getting ready to launch a brand new product for your company. It is your turn to give an update in the meeting, and so you say, "Welcome, everyone. As you know, my team has come up with a process that's going to save us 2 months on product development. Let me walk you through our proposal." In that moment, you're about to get into the meat of what it is you want to share when suddenly Bob talks over you and says something like, "Have we aligned on the distribution channels for this product? I'm concerned because the distribution channels were a major obstacle in the last launch." Bob has now stolen the floor from you. This was your time to talk and give an update, and Bob has hijacked the conversation and is now talking about something that is unrelated to your update. This is your moment to use the BPI framework to take back the spotlight. You're going to start with the B in the BPI framework, which stands for build. Build is where you build on what Bob just shared. So, for example, you might say, "That's a great point, Bob. The distribution plan is going to make a really big impact on how successful this launches overall. We should take a closer look at it to make sure that we're aligned and that we feel good about the approach." Now, you might be thinking that this seems counterintuitive. If Bob is talking over you and introducing this unrelated topic, why would you then respond to Bob by building on the unrelated topic that he is pivoting to? The reason you do this is because it's a super effective persuasion technique. When you build on what Bob is sharing, you are effectively agreeing with Bob. You are basically communicating to Bob, "Hey, I agree with you. I'm on your side. We're on the same team." And here's a rhetorical question, but what happens when 2 people are on the same team? Those 2 people no longer argue with one another because they're fully aligned. So what you're doing is you're creating a quick form of trust, collaboration, and partnership with Bob that you are later going to use to steer the conversation back towards the topic that you want to be discussing. So the B in BPI stands for build. You're going to build on what the person shared, acknowledge why it's important, and that sets you up perfectly for the P in the BPI framework, which stands for pivot. Now that you've built that goodwill by showing the stakeholder that you agree that their topic is important, you have perfectly set yourself up to pivot away from it. So let me show you what it looks like to first build and then add on the pivot. You would say, "That's a great point, Bob. The distribution plan is going to make a really big impact on how successful this launches overall. We should take a closer look at it to make sure that we're aligned and that we feel good about the approach." Before we do that, I want to zoom out and look at the product development timeline. So you can see that I added that pivot phrase. I said, before we do, I want to zoom out and look at the product development timeline. Zooming out is a great neutral phrase to use anytime you want to redirect without it feeling confrontational or antagonistic between you and the other stakeholder. Now, I want to point out the big mistake that people make, and that mistake is jumping into the pivot. We think to ourselves, "Oh no, Bob stole the floor. I need to pivot and get back to my original topic." But if we don't build and offer Bob some agreement and some level of goodwill before we then make the pivot, we aren't setting up the pivot to have its maximum impact. One of the best ways to redirect a stakeholder and get them to go in a different direction is to agree with them partially before you gently start steering them in a new direction. And you'll see really effective leaders doing this. If you've ever had someone at work convince you to take on a project or convince you to agree with something, and then you came away from that conversation being like, how did they get me to do that? They probably used some of these techniques to bring you along. So now that you've done the build and the pivot, you're ready for the final part of the BPI framework, which stands for inspire. This is where you share something that gets the room feeling inspired and re-engaged in your original topic. The reason it's important to inspire and re-engage the room before you dive back into your topic is because the whole Bob derailment situation created chaos and noise and distraction in the room. And if you dive straight back into where you left off without re-engaging your audience emotionally, it's going to feel a little abrupt. It's going to feel like you had this back and forth with Bob and then boom, clunk, we're back in the update. We want to smooth that transition by engaging our audience emotionally and reminding them why the topic that we were about to dive into is exciting, not just for us, but for everyone in the room. So here's an example of what you might say. I'm going to share the build, the pivot, and the inspire so that you can hear how it flows together. That's a great point, Bob. The distribution plan is going to make a really big impact on how successful this launches overall. We should take a closer look at it to make sure that we're aligned and that we feel good about the approach. Before we do that, I want to zoom out and look at the product development timeline. My team is excited because we were able to save 2 months on product development, which means that this product is going to be our most profitable product yet. Let me walk you through the proposal. So you can see in this example how me inspiring the audience softens that pivot back into my tactical update. And not only that, but I get to create a moment where I'm showcasing the value of my work in a way that's also very uplifting and exciting for my audience. Because the win that I'm creating through my team's work is also benefiting the company and the stakeholders in the room, including Bob. So this creates a moment of collective excitement. I get my audience inspired, and inspiring your audience is one of the most effective and authentic ways to control the room. When your audience is inspired, they genuinely want to hear what you are saying, which means you will have the floor and you will be listened to. I think sometimes we think that you control the room by being loud and aggressive and domineering, and maybe some people use that approach. Honestly, I haven't seen that be super effective over the long run. I think a much better way to control the room is to get people genuinely invested and excited. And this brings me to a bonus tip that I want to share that is super important, which is anytime you are walking into a meeting where you are going to be sharing something or giving an update, you always want to know the bigger why behind why your update is exciting and inspirational for everyone in the room. So every room you walk into, you want to be really clear in your mind on this one question. Why is my contribution compelling and exciting? When you have that in your back pocket, it will be so much easier to command attention. So to recap the BPI framework, you want to first build on what the stakeholder said when they talked over you. Then you want to pivot and say, before we get into that, I want to zoom out and look at blank. And then you move to the final piece of the framework, which stands for inspire, and you want to remind your audience why the topic that you're returning back to is exciting and inspirational. If you found this episode helpful, I think you're going to love my free PDF worksheet. It's called 5 Phrases to Help You Sound Like a Leader. This is a printable PDF, and it teaches you 5 phrases that will help you exude authority and credibility when you speak at work so that you can be super impressive to your boss and to the other stakeholders in the room. Grab it for free by clicking the link in the description box or in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.